who here loves to cook? Nobody, one person. Nobody likes to cook. Come on, we like to cook. We're a fast food church or something. But what's the, if I'm coming over to your house, what are you making me? What's the best thing you cook? Pork, yeah, that's true. I get that fried. That sounds good. Fried chicken? Oh, I like it. Gwen's special, you might have had it before if you come over, one-pan chicken. You ever had that? It's good. Gwen's one-pan chicken. Chicken, potatoes, green beans, Italian seasoning, it's good. I'm told I make a pretty good Italian wedding soup, actually. I do. Gwen says so. I can do some cooking. I'm not too bad. But, cooking's an art, isn't it? Knowing what to add, knowing what ingredients to put together. It makes me think about the best meals I've ever eaten. I'm gonna make you hungry today. Coming in at number 3, I'm serious, I'm gonna rank them. Coming in at number 3 were the filet mignon tacos at Tommy Bahama's in Jupiter, Florida. So good. I was actually with Tully and eating these things. It was good. Filet mignon tacos, the taste was fantastic. Number 2 was the filet mignon. I'm a steak guy, obviously, and potato croquettes. You ever have these potato croquettes? It's basically fried mashed potatoes. Oh, so good. And the number one dish I've ever had is called chicken Kiev. It's stuffed chicken breast. You can get it at the Russian Tea Room in New York City. If you're ever in New York City, go to the Russian Tea Room, order the chicken Kiev. It is the best thing I've probably ever eaten, besides what Gwen cooks me every single day. Now, we could talk all day about cooking highs, but let's talk a little bit about cooking lows, okay? My biggest cooking fail of all time came when I was a teenager. I was just starting to learn how to cook a little bit. I could do some hot dogs, mac and cheese, pasta, just the general things to do. Well, one day I was hungry and I got a frozen pizza. Now, you might be thinking, how in the world can you mess up a frozen pizza? Well, you didn't know me when I was a teenager, okay? So, I got the frozen pizza out, looked at the instructions, did everything I was supposed to do, put it in the oven. And then when I got it out, I realized that the bottom of the pizza wasn't cooked. It was cold and doughy, but the top of it was like cooked. The cheese was melted and looked like it was done. How did this happen? So, apparently, you have to make sure you take the cardboard off of the bottom of the pizza before you put it in the oven. Oops. Yeah. Oops. Epic cooking fail. Cook an entire pizza on cardboard. Oops. That's my cooking fail. Or, the movie Christmas Vacation. They cut open the turkey and put it in too early. That's a big one. Or cooking fail, go and visit Alex's dining hall at Geneva College every Sunday night. There's a lot of cooking fails there. But anyway, I'm sure you've experienced some cooking fails at some point, and you've experienced some cooking highs at another point. So in the spirit of all things cooking, the message for today comes in the form of a simple cooking instruction: just add flour. Simple, right? Just add flour. That's the message for today. So go ahead and turn your Bibles to 2 Kings chapter 4. 2 Kings 4 is a big chapter. We've kind of been in it a lot, but this is part 7 of our series, God of Miracles, based on the life of the prophet Elijah. And if you look at your heading, the story for today certainly sounds like a cooking fail right off the bat. It's called the deadly stew, or even death in a pot. Talk about a cooking fail. So let's look at it, verse 38. It says, "And Elisha came again to Gilgal, where there was a famine in the land. And as the sons of the prophets were sitting before him, he said to his servant, 'Set on the large pot and boil stew for the sons of the prophets.' One of them went out into the field to gather herbs and found a wild vine and gathered from his lap full of wild gourds, and came and cut them up into the pot of stew, not knowing what they were. And they poured out some for the men to eat. But while they were eating of the stew, they cried out, "O man of God, there is death in the pot," and they could not eat it. Oh, ouch. So if you see from that story, there was a famine in the land. But even during a famine where there's not a lot of food, you still have to come up with something to eat, right? It's like when you don't have any groceries in your house and your kids are saying, "I'm hungry." You're like, I guess we'll figure out something for you to eat. I don't know. But, even during famine, you have to figure something out. So Elisha tells his servant, "Hey, boil some stew. Boil some stew." Well, the problem was one of the sons of prophets, which basically means one of Elisha's followers, they went out, gathered some wild gourds, cut them up, and threw them in the pot of stew, not knowing what they were. But it ended up being quite the cooking fail. One commentator offered this explanation. He said, when they were put in the stew, some of the group recognized the taste of the gourds, now usually identified with Citrullus colocynthus. I don't know if anyone has a botany degree. There you go. But that were known to have, listen to this, I love the Bible. It's so cool. That were known to have powerful laxative properties and to be fatal if taken in substantial quantity. That's right. Dude puts gourds in the stew and they have powerful laxative properties. Now, I'll let your mind go ahead and wonder for themselves as to what would happen if you ate of this stew. But all I'm going to say is a particular scene from the movie Dumb and Dumber comes to mind, and I'm just going to leave it at that, okay? Anyway, whether you feel like whether this stew would actually cause actual death, or you just feel like you wanted to die like I do after I eat Pizza Hut, every time I feel like I just would rather die, okay? But whatever it is, the issue was there was a famine, okay? The sons of prophet needed to eat, and the stew was inedible. Oh, man of God, there's death in the pot, and they could not eat it. But then, here he comes, Mr. Pepto-Bismol himself, Elisha, to save the day and to save the prophets from this death in a pot stew that causes all kinds of problems. Elisha said, "Then bring flour." And he threw it into the pot and said, "Pour some out for the men that they may eat." And there was no harm in the pot. Now, let's start here. Did you notice how Elisha purified the stew? What did he do? He added. He didn't try to get the harmful gourds out of the stew. He added the flour. He added a good thing. Listen, the world that we live in always has been a deathly stew. If you eat of the world, you'll certainly get sick and maybe even die. The world, the things of the world, is a deathly stew. It's literally death in a pot. 2 Timothy 3, he warns us. He says, "Don't be naive. There are difficult times ahead. As the end approaches, people are going to be self-absorbed, money-hungry, self-promoting, stuck-up, profane, contemptuous of parents, crude, coarse, dog-eat-dog, unbending, slanderous, impulsively wild, savage, cynical, treacherous, ruthless, bloated windbags." I like this. This is the Message translation. I just like that. "Addicted to lust and allergic to God." Doesn't that just describe the world we live in today? It's a deathly stew. The world is allergic to God. But again, did you notice what Elisha did to purify this deathly stew? He added. Man, there is a list of things that are harmful in the world today that I would love to remove. Can I get an amen? I mean, there are all kinds of things that I would just love to remove. I have kids. I'd love to just remove things from the world. But I think, though, that we can get so focused on what we need to remove or what we would like to see removed from the world that we forget to add to it. Because here's the reality. I certainly wish I did. But I've found that I usually don't have the power to remove things from the world. Wish I could. Watch the news, wish I could remove a lot of things in the world today. But I've discovered the more I grow that oftentimes I just don't have the power to be able to remove those things. But I've also realized that I do, though, always have the power to add. I always have the power to add. That's why we as the church will always be more effective when we're focused on adding rather than removing. Because we'll always have the power to add to the world. You are the salt of the earth. But if salt has lost its taste, how shall its saltiness be restored? It's no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled under people's feet. We're the salt of the earth. See, salt, like the flour in our story, it preserves. Especially in biblical times where there was no salt, bacteria thrived and food became deathly, kind of like this deathly stew. But Jesus says that we, the people of God, the church, we are the salt of the earth. And we will always, because of that, we will always have the power to add to the world because we are the thing that gives the world its flavoring. We are the thing that preserves the world. We'll always have the power to add. But the question is, are we? Are we? Or has our saltiness lost its taste, as Jesus describes in Matthew chapter 5? Well, to answer that question, let's first address what actually gives us saltiness in the first place. What makes us the salt of the earth? If you're familiar with the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew, you'll know that right before Jesus says, you are the salt of the earth, what comes before those are these statements he makes called the Beatitudes. Let me read those to you now. And he opened his mouth and taught them, saying, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be satisfied. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called sons of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when others revile you and persecute you and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely on my account. Now you read this passage and all of these statements that Jesus makes, but a common misconception of the Beatitudes is that there's some kind of measuring stick or things we need to get better at, things we need to master. But listen, pay close attention. The Beatitudes are not prescriptive. They are descriptive of the kinds of people God blesses. In other words, they're not things for us to accomplish or try harder to meet. They're just simply descriptions of the kinds of people that God blesses. It's not, you don't look at the Beatitudes and say, wow, you know what, I think I really need to try to be meeker. I need to be meeker. Because what happens is when you try to be meeker and you end up thinking that you've become meeker, you walk around saying, I've become a really meek person. Wait, that doesn't make any sense. You see what I'm saying here? It's not, oh, Jesus said, blessed are those who mourn, so I think I need to mourn more. I think I'll become more sad all the time. No, who likes to be around Eeyore? You know what I mean? It's not more and more, it's, or how about this one? Jesus said, blessed are the pure in heart, so I need to make sure my heart is pure. So, I'm gonna try really hard to make my heart pure. Well, then what happens is you walk around saying, look at my pure heart now. You become a self-righteous person. Or my favorite is, blessed are those who are persecuted. Oh, so that means I need to try more to be persecuted for righteousness' sake. So I'm gonna go out there and try to be persecuted and pick fights with people. Then you're just a jerk, you know what I mean? You're just rude, you don't go out trying to be persecuted. It makes no sense. Get the point? That's what I'm saying. The Beatitudes, they're not prescriptive. You don't look at them and say, oh, I need to be more of this. They're just descriptive of the kinds of people that God blesses, of what your heart is like. God blesses weak people, struggling people, people who actually see their need for grace. Those are the people who are blessed. So follow me here. We are the salt of the earth when we're simply the kinds of people who understand our need for grace. It's as simple as that. You have to try harder. You just need to understand your need for grace. So what's the opposite of that? Well, then why would we lose our saltiness? Why would we lose our taste? Well, we lose those things when we don't see our need for grace. To give you an idea that describes this, I found online, I found the unbeatitudes. This is good. You ready for this? The unbeatitudes. Congratulations to the entitled, for they get their way. Congratulations to the carefree, for they are comfortable. Congratulations to the pushy, for they always get ahead. Congratulations to the self-righteous, for they are always right. Congratulations to the vengeful, for they shall be feared. Congratulations to the argumentative, for they shall always get the last word. Congratulations to the winners, for they get all the attention. This is my favorite. Congratulations to those who don't get caught, for they shall look good. See, we lose our taste. We lose our saltiness when we are entitled, when we're carefree, we don't care about other people, when we're pushy, when we're self-righteous, when we're vengeful, when we're argumentative, when we need to win, and when we're fake. That's when we lose our saltiness. Ultimately, we lose our saltiness simply when we lose sight of our need every day for God's grace. That's when we lose our saltiness, when we think we can handle it, when we think we have all the answers. We're not the salt of the earth then. We've lost our taste. But we are the salt of the earth when we see our need for grace, that makes us poor in spirit. When we mourn, when we're meek, when we see our need for grace, we hunger and we thirst for righteousness. We're merciful, we're peacemakers. When we see our need for grace, when we're reviled, when we're persecuted or wrongly accused, we won't fight back. We'll just admit our wrongs. And when we see our need for grace, we're just real people. We're not out there trying to prove to people that we're, these holy rollers or something. We're not. We're just people, broken people, messy people in need of grace. And that is the flavoring that we bring to the world. Because the world lives on the unbeatitudes. That's how the world lives. They live on the unbeatitudes. But when we come in with something so counter to how the world operates, we become the salt of the earth. We preserve it. We give it its flavoring. We are the salt of the earth when we simply are desperate to receive the grace of God in our lives. So that means we preserve the world not by our strength, but by our weakness. Not by might, nor by power, but by my spirit, says the Lord of hosts. Who are you, great mountain? Before Zerubbabel, you shall become a plain, and he shall bring forward the stone among shouts of what? Grace, grace to it. That is how we are the salt of the earth, with shouts of grace, grace, grace to it. That's what we're called to add. We add this flour to the deathly stew of the world amid shouts of grace, grace to it. And that, church, is the preservative that the world so desperately needs that only we can bring to it. We purify the deathly stew of the world through the salt, through the flour that we add to it. But the flour that Elisha added in the story was also a sign of what was to come. You see in verse 41, he says, and there was no harm in the pot. It's a picture of what is to come. Look at Isaiah chapter 11. It says, the wolf shall dwell with the lamb, and the leopard shall lie down with the young goat, and the calf and the lion and the fattened calf together, and a little child shall lead them. The cow and the bear shall graze, their young shall lie down together, and the lion shall eat straw like the ox. The nursing child shall play over the hole of the cobra, and the weaned child shall put his hand on the adder's den. They shall not hurt or destroy in all my holy mountain, for the earth shall be full of the knowledge of the Lord as the waters cover the sea. That is what is to come. And there was no harm in the pot. When Elisha put that flour in the stew, it was literally a visual representation of the redemption God will bring to the whole world. The final and ultimate redemption that God will bring. As Romans said, as the earth, it's pains, a childbirth, pains waiting and groaning for this to come. This is a picture of what is to come, where the deathly stew of the world that we all know and have experienced so well, when that deathly stew of the world becomes a savory stew, where the whole earth knows the knowledge of the Lord. That's what's coming. So quick recap here. Elisha's flour in the pot of death, it gives us a picture, number one, of our part in the redemption of the world. Because we are the salt of the earth, we play a part in the redemption of the world, turning it from a deathly stew to a savory stew. That's what we're called to do as the church. That's a picture of it. And number two, it's a picture of the ultimate and final redemption of the whole world, when God will purify all things in the world. But number three, it shows us something else that God redeems. I want to read the story again, and this time I want you to pay close attention to who put these wild gourds in the stew and made it deathly. You might have caught it before, but look. Elisha came again to Gilgal, where there was a famine, and the sons of the prophets were sitting before him. He said to his servant, set on a large pot and boil stew for the sons of the prophets. And then it says, verse 39, one of them went out to the field to gather herbs and found a wild vine and gathered from it his lap full of wild gourds and came and cut them up into the pot of stew, not knowing what they were. So who added the harmful gourds to the stew? Who made the pot of stew harmful? One of the sons of the prophets. He cut them up, it says, in the pot of stew, not knowing what they were. One of the sons of the prophets added these wild gourds to the stew and made it deathly. Whether it was his carelessness, or his shortcomings, or just blind stupidity, a man who was committed to serving God, he was seeking to help others. He was the one who put the harmful gourds in the stew. And as I read this story, I thought, how many harmful gourds have I put in the stew? Because even my best of intentions have turned out to be harmful. You been there? Your best of intentions turns out to be harmful. The zeal for serving God. I have a zeal for serving God, but sometimes I've found that that's ended up repelling others rather than drawing them closer to Jesus. I've given counsel to other people, and sometimes that counsel hasn't helped. It's probably harmed. I've thought my message and teaching was very clear. It's clear today, right? But sometimes, people probably leave uncertain and confused. I've responded one way, should have responded another way. I let my kids do certain things, and in hindsight, I probably shouldn't. I didn't let my kids do other things, and in hindsight, I probably should have. I try to do everything I can to be a good parent, a good spouse, a good friend, but oftentimes my efforts, they do more harm than good. Even our best of intentions turn out to be harmful. How many harmful gourds have I put in the stew? Have you put in the stew? And yet, God, listen to this, God does not allow our errors to derail his kingdom or his people. How many times Christ cushions our folly, redeems our errors, and neutralizes our stupidity. Isn't it so true? This story, it gives us a picture of how God redeems the world, gives us a picture of our part in the redemption of the world, but it also gives us a picture of how he even redeems our efforts to serve him. In only the way that God can. God will take our frustrated and fallen, and most of the time even foolish attempts to serve him, and he will turn those things and make them useful and edifying and profitable for his glory and for the good of others. We serve an amazing God who can take even our folly and make it profitable. Wow. Therefore, my beloved brothers, be steadfast, immovable, always abounding in the work of the Lord, knowing that in the Lord your labor is not ever in vain. Ever. Even when you mess it all up, God can take your mess up and turn it into something profitable. Wow. What an amazing God that we serve. God can take a knucklehead like me and use me to impact his kingdom. And he can take a knucklehead like you too. And you want to know why? Because knuckleheads are all God has to work with. That's why he can take our foolish and feeble attempts, our broken attempts to serve him and build his kingdom, and make them profitable to build his kingdom. Listen to me. You will inevitably put harmful gourds in the stew. And you're going to do it. You are going to mess it up. You are going to fail. You're gonna make mistakes, and you're gonna hurt other people in the process. You just are. It's inevitable. But here's something else that's also inevitable. Nothing can ever thwart the work of the Lord. Nothing. Nothing. Not even you. You can't even mess it up. And even in your best of efforts, you still mess it up. But you can't mess it up because God, nothing can thwart the work of the Lord. Nothing. Your labor is never, ever, ever in vain. When you come away from a conversation that you had with somebody and you're beating yourself up, why did I say that? Shouldn't have said that. Even in those moments, God can take your foolish, messed up words and use it to draw people back to him. He's an amazing God. That's what he does. Nothing can thwart the work of the Lord, not even you. Not even you. I love being the pastor of this church. I love it. I love serving you. I love it. I love it. But I'm going to tell you, I will inevitably put harmful gourds into this stew. I will. Wish I said I'll never do that. I will, probably already have. I will inevitably put harmful gourds into the stew. Why? Because I'm a sinner. I mess up. I make mistakes. But I'm believing that God will always redeem it. Always. Because nothing can thwart the work of the Lord. Not even me. I love my wife. There she is. Doesn't she look pretty today? She does. Somebody cheering a little too loud. No, I love my wife. Hopefully you love your spouse. But I will inevitably put harmful gourds into our marriage. Inevitably. You will too. You're a sinner. But I'm believing God will always redeem it because nothing can thwart the work of the Lord. I love my kids. I love my kids. But I will already likely have, as we're screaming at them to get out the door, wherever we go, or Taya came out yesterday completely naked in the yard, in the front yard. She had a little underwear on, but then, it's like, what are you doing? I will inevitably put harmful gourds into my kids' lives because I'm a sinner. But I'm believing today that God will redeem it because nothing can thwart the work of the Lord. Maybe you have a child who's run off, who's doesn't believe anymore or whatever it is. Maybe they're in the pig pen like the prodigal son. Maybe that's you today and you struggle with that. I want to tell you today, nothing can thwart the work of the Lord. You need to give yourself grace. Nothing can thwart the work of the Lord. Just keep believing and keep your eyes fixed on the horizon because nothing can ever thwart the work of the Lord. Here's the point. I will inevitably put harmful gourds in just about every area of my life, all of it, because I'm a sinner. However, I'm believing that God will redeem it all because nothing can thwart the work of the Lord. Elijah said, then bring flour. I love it. Then bring flour. And he threw it into the pot and said, pour some out for the men that they may eat. And there was no harm in the pot. I believe today that God redeems all of my mistakes, all my failures, all my shortcomings, all my carelessness, all my short-sightedness, because nothing can ever thwart the work of the Lord. Nothing. And I believe that to be true because of the story that follows right after this story. Look at verse 42. A man came from Baal Shalishah, bringing the man of God bread of the first fruits, 20 loaves of barley, and fresh ears of grain in his sack. And Elisha said, give it to the men that they may eat. But his servant said, how can I set this before 100 men? So he repeated, give them to the men that they may eat. For thus says the Lord, they shall eat and have some left. So he set it before them, and they ate and had some left according to the word of the Lord. So this man comes with bread. It's a simple story. He comes with bread, and Elisha multiplies it, so much so that all the men ate and had some left. Reminds me of another story, right? Look at John chapter 6. This is Jesus right after the miracle of the feeding of the 5,000. He said, our fathers ate the manna in the wilderness, as it is written, he gave them bread from heaven to eat. Jesus then said to them, truly, truly, I say to you, it was not Moses who gave you the bread from heaven, but my Father gives you the true bread from heaven. For the bread of God is he who comes down from heaven and gives life to the world. They said to him, sir, give us this bread always. Jesus said to them, I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me shall not hunger, and whoever believes in me shall never thirst. Whoever comes to him shall never hunger. Whoever believes in him shall never thirst, because he is the bread of life. And he never runs out. Never runs out. And by the way, what's the main ingredient in bread? Then bring flour. And he threw it into the pot and said, pour some out for the men that they may eat. And look, there was no harm in the pot. Flour, flour, flour. Just add the flour. I got a recipe for you to try today. For every mistake you've ever made, for every failure, for every struggle, for every shortcoming, from every disappointment, for every circumstance, just keep adding that flour. Just keep adding it, because it never runs out. Whoever believes in me will never hunger, will never thirst. He is the bread of life. There's always more Jesus. He never adds out, never runs out. And they ate and had some left, according to the word of the Lord. Church, the flour never runs out, ever. You just gotta add flour. Our deficiency is no crisis for Jesus's adequacy. Our weaknesses are no crisis for Jesus's strength. Our mistakes and failures are no crisis for Jesus's perfection. And our carelessness and our short-sightedness, and sometimes our just pure stupidity, is no crisis for the sovereignty of King Jesus. You will inevitably, and already have, put so many harmful gourds in the stew, but nothing can thwart the work of the Lord, because King Jesus is sovereign over all of your mistakes, all your shortcomings, all your failures, every broken relationship, every failed situation, every difficult circumstance. God is totally 100% in control of it, because he is Jesus, the bread of life that never runs out. He is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation. For by him all things were created in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or rulers or authorities, all things were created through him and for him. And he is before all things, and in him all things hold together. He is the head of the body, the church. He's the beginning, the firstborn from the dead, that in everything he might be preeminent. For in him all the fullness of God was pleased to dwell, and through him to reconcile to himself all things, whether on earth or in heaven, making peace by the blood of his cross. And I love how it takes a turn in verse 21, and Paul says, and you, who were once alienated and hostile in mind, doing evil deeds, he is now reconciled, redeemed, added his flour to your deathly stew in his body of flesh by his death, in order to present you holy and blameless and above reproach before him. If indeed you continue in the flesh, in the faith, stable and steadfast, not shifting from the hope of the gospel that you heard, which I had been proclaimed in all of creation under heaven, I of which Paul became a minister. He's sovereign over all of it. And so you're telling me that God can't redeem your mistake? He sure can. He is the flour. He's the bread of life. And I love that in verse 17, if you know cooking at all, just a little bit, even you're making cookies and the dough's falling apart. What do you add to the dough to make sure it holds together? Just add some flour. There's only one ingredient that's powerful enough to redeem the death in a pot world that we live in. Only one ingredient powerful enough to redeem the harmful gourds that we will always inevitably put in this stew. There's only one ingredient that can transform it into a savory stew, and it's nothing but Jesus. Just add some flour and watch what God can do. Graves to gardens, beauty from ashes, mourning to dancing. That's what our God does. Because he's big enough, he's mighty enough and strong enough to break every curse, to redeem the darkest places in the world, to call the furthest people back to him. Big enough, mighty enough, and strong enough to redeem your every mistake, every failure, and every weakness, every stronghold in your life. He is big enough. All you gotta do is just keep adding the flour that never runs out. And you know what happens when you just keep adding the flour? Eventually, the flour just takes over. So look out, world. Here comes the flour, the salt of the earth, Jesus. He's more than enough. He's sovereign over all things. Look out, failure. Look out, mistake. Look out, brokenness. Here comes the flour. He's gonna take it over. Here comes the flour, the bread of life, King Jesus. He's gonna take it over. Come on, here we go.